The committee may also discuss any proposal that has been made about special education programs or special ed services for that child. Committee members will discuss any such proposal at your request or at the request of your child if the child is 16 years of age or older. And this really refers to questions about what special ed programs and services are, what they will mean for the child, what modified programs might mean, what accommodations might mean. And you really are or should be encouraged to ask questions and join in the discussion. Sometimes as educators we tend to talk in lots of educational jargon and we tend to use lots of acronyms and initials, and I could imagine if on the other side of the table as mums and dads it can be quite overwhelming. It's probably quite helpful to parents if the jargon is not used and the acronyms are really explained. But as well, you need to ask questions and join in the discussion. If you don't know what something means, say, excuse me, could you please explain that? Following the discussion and after all the information has been presented and considered, the committee will make its decision. And remember, there are two decisions to be made. There's the decision about the child's identification, and there's a decision to be made about the child's placement. What will the IPRC consider in making its placement decision? And this is the placement decision. Before the IPRC can consider placing your child in a special ed class, it must consider whether placement in a regular class with appropriate special ed services will meet your child's need and be consistent with your preferences. I don't want to use lots of or any numbers tonight in my presentation, but I will use one percentage. 80% of all exceptional pupils in the province of Ontario, and that's well over 200,000, 80% of them are receiving special ed program services in a regular class. So the vast majority of exceptional students are receiving it in a regular class. And the ministry requires that school boards look at the regular class as the first option. And if that meets your child's needs and consistent with your preferences, then a regular class placement it will be. If, after considering all of the information presented, the IPRC is satisfied that placement in a regular class will meet the child's needs and that such a decision is consistent with your preferences, the committee will decide in favor of placement in a regular class with appropriate special education services, which means the presence of resource teachers and support staff to work with the student on the special ed program in the child's regular classroom. If, however, the committee decides that your child should be placed in a special education class, it must state the reasons for that decision in its written statement of decision. And when I say a special education class, I'm really talking about those self-contained classrooms that some boards have for different exceptional children. So then the IPRC will generate a written statement of decision, and this statement will include whether the IPRC has identified your child as exceptional. And let me just stop here for a minute, because not all children who are presented to an IPRC are in fact exceptional. Some children learn at different rates, but that does not make that child learning disabled. Some children have interesting behaviors, but that does not necessarily make that child behaviorally exceptional. So the identification has to be a bona fide, legitimate identification of an exceptionality. So therefore, some kids will not be identified. Some kids will be not exceptional, and they will be working in a regular program. Where the IPRC has identified your child as exceptional, according to the categories and definitions which I covered before in terms of the different exceptionalities, the IPRC must have a description of your child's strengths and needs, and the IPRC placement decision and recommendations regarding a special education programs and special ed services must be in that written decision as well. Most important are the description of the child's strengths and needs. And I think, as an aside here, I think it's really important when talking to a child who has been identified as being exceptional that an honest effort is made to look at what the child's real strengths and needs are. And in light of the fact that everybody has strengths and needs, it's important for the child to see themselves in that context. That there are some things they do really well, and there are some things that they need assistance with. And where the IPRC has decided that your child should be placed in a special education class, the written decision must include the reasons for that decision. Now, what could happen after the IPRC has made its decision? Well, a couple of things. If the parent agrees with the IPRC decision, and that's a decision around the identification and the placement, the parent will be asked to indicate by signing your name that you agree with the identification and placement decisions made by the IPRC. That statement of decision may be signed at the meeting itself or may be taken home and returned at a later date. Not too much of a later date, but in a couple of days. Personally, I encourage the parents at IPRCs to take that statement home and to look at it and to call back if they have any questions and sign it at their leisure. I don't require personally a signature at the IPRC meeting. However, sometimes that's what happens. If the IPRC has identified your child as an exceptional pupil and, sorry, I just went ahead. Okay, I'm sorry. If the IPRC identified your child as an exceptional pupil and you have agreed with the IPRC, the board will notify the principal of the school at which the special education program is to be provided of the need to develop an individual educational plan for your child. Once a child has been placed in a special ed program, can the placement be reviewed? And the answer in short is absolutely yes. A review IPRC will be held if a change in either the identification or the placement is being recommended by the principal, or you as the parent may request a review IPRC meeting any time after your child has been in the special ed program for at least 3 months. And the timeline for 3 months is just to sort of see if the programming is making any difference. So yes, the placement can be reviewed either at your request or the principal's request. What happens at a review IPRC? What do they consider and decide? Similar sorts of information that was originally considered. With your written permission, the IPRC conducting the review will consider the progress your child has made in relation to the IEP over the 3 months. Has the child met the goals and has learned according to the expectations? And this IPRC will then review the placement identification decisions and decide whether they should be continued or whether a different decision should now be made. This is an important slide that I want people to look at and to think about, and this is what can parents do if they disagree with an IPRC decision, and there are times when they do. If you do not agree with either the identification, let me say that one again, with either the identification or the placement, you may, within 15 days, that's 3 school weeks of receipt of the decision, request that the IPRC hold a second meeting to discuss your concern. If, even after the second meeting, you do not agree with the decision, you may file a written notice of appeal within 15 days of your receipt of the decision or within 30 days of receipt of the decision if no second meeting has taken place. And this written notice of appeal must be filed with the Director of Education and the Secretary of the Board of Education. That's usually the same person. So if you don't agree with the review IPRC decision, then you need to put in writing that you're asking for an appeal within 15 days of the original of the review IPRC or 30 days of the original meeting, and you must send that written letter to the Director of Education / Secretary of the School Board. Your child's identification and placement cannot change until the appeal process is completed. So if you change your agreement with the identification and placement, and the child's already been in that particular placement, that placement will stay in place until the appeal process is completed. And boards try very hard to do that in a timely manner, but you can also see that it's already going to take at least 3 weeks to get things underway. If you do not consent to the IPRC decision and you do not appeal it, the board will instruct the principal to implement the IPRC decision. And this is really critical, that if you don't consent to the decision of identification and or placement and you don't appeal it, the student will be placed in the special education program that was indicated in the IPRC and will have that identification and will have that placement. So if you don't consent, you need to appeal, and first of all, you need to ask for a second IPRC review meeting. How does one appeal an IPRC decision? And again, here are those dates again. If you disagree with the IPRC's decision of your child as exceptional or with the placement, you may, within 30 days of receipt of the original decision or 15 days of the second review IPRC, give written notification of your intention to appeal to the Director of Education and Secretary of the Board. That's one person, by the way. So within 15 days of the review and 30 days of the original IPRC, put your request for an appeal in writing and mail it to or deliver it to the Director of Education's office. What happens in the appeal process? Well, the appeal process is an interesting one. I've been involved in a couple. There's a couple of steps involved. The board will establish a special ed appeal board to hear your appeal. The appeal board is not necessarily the same ones that were on the IPRC. In fact, it's rarely those people. The appeal board will be comprised of 3 persons, one of whom is to be selected by you, the parent, one selected by the board, and a third selected jointly by the board and the parent guardian, who have no prior knowledge of the matter under appeal. So you can see the attempt is being made to have an impartial person as the third person. The one person by the board is usually an administrator of special education of some sorts. The person who's selected by the parent can range from the parent themselves to an advocate to a representative. And the third party who's selected by the board and the parent, quite often that's an arbitrator that can be met, who can be met with and agreed upon by both parties before the appeal board meeting can get underway. The chairperson of the appeal board, which is usually that third party, will arrange a meeting to take place at a convenient time and place, but no later than 30 days after he or she has been selected, unless both parties provide written consent to a later date. But you can see how time is going, and if the appeal process is really important, then we need to stick to those times as much as possible. The appeal board will get all the material that the IPRC had originally and may interview any persons who may be able to contribute information about the matter under appeal. So that could be the child's teacher, principal, anybody else who is able to contribute information that's under appeal. You, the parent, and your child, if he or she is 16 years of age or older, are entitled to be present and to participate in all discussions, just like at the IPRC. And if interpreter required, they will be provided through the Board of Education. So it's not your responsibility. What happens at the appeal process? The appeal board must make its recommendation within 3 days of the date of the meeting. The appeal board may agree with the IPRC and recommend that the decision be implemented, or the appeal board may disagree with the IPRC and make a recommendation to the board about your child's identification, about your child's placement, or both, I should say. The appeal board will report its recommendations in writing to you and to the school board, providing the reasons for its recommendations. And within 30 days of receiving the appeal board's written statement, the school board will decide what action it will take with respect to the recommendations. Boards are not required to follow the appeal board recommendation, because you'll see there's another step that can happen. You may accept the decision of the school board, or you may appeal to what's known as a special education tribunal. And each of these steps becomes more formal, so the appeal step is more formal than the IPRC, and certainly the special education tribunal is more formal than the appeal board. You may request a hearing by writing to the Secretary of the Special Education Tribunal. Information about making an application will be included with the appeal board's decision. So if it needs to go to the tribunal level, then the parent will be provided information about how to make application to that tribunal.